Imagine this, you're part of a close-knit community, the kind where everyone knows each other and life moves at a slower, more familiar pace. You think you know your neighbors, you know the families that make up the fabric of your town. Then suddenly a family vanishes. A seemingly perfect family, the kind that makes you believe in the goodness of the world. But their disappearance isn't a quiet fading away. It's a jarring silence that echoes with unanswered questions. That's the story we're diving into today. A story that reminds us that even in the most idyllic settings, darkness can lurk beneath the surface. Welcome to CrimePod Castle's Twisted Crime series. Please like, comment, share, and subscribe. We're going to explore the case of the Halderson family from Windsor, Wisconsin. Bart and Krista, the parents, were the picture of a loving couple devoted to their two sons, Mitchell, the successful older son living independently, and Chandler, the younger one, still at home, seemingly on a path to a bright future in IT.
You hit the nail on the head with seemingly, because as we'll unravel, Chandler's carefully constructed life was anything but what it appeared to be. This young man living under the same roof as his parents had built an elaborate facade, a fictional world where he was a star student, an intern, even a potential employee at SpaceX.
SpaceX?
Yeah.
Wow, that's a pretty bold lie to maintain. It makes you wonder, what was going on in his mind? Why go to such lengths to create this alternate reality?
That's precisely the question that puzzled everyone, including seasoned investigators. Was it a desperate need for approval, an inability to cope with the pressures of expectations? Or was there something darker at play, a deeper psychological struggle that we may never fully comprehend?
Let's rewind a bit and talk about the events leading up to this shocking discovery. It all began on July 2nd, 2021, a seemingly ordinary day that would soon turn into a nightmare for the Halderson family.
Krista, a dedicated and reliable employee, failed to show up for work. This was completely out of character for her, immediately raising concern among her colleagues and friends. One of our close friends, Dan, decided to check on Krista at home. What he found added another layer of mystery to the unfolding events.
What did Dan discover?
He found both of the Haldersons' cars in the driveway, but no one answered the door. Eventually, Chandler appeared seemingly nonchalant, dressed only in a towel. He calmly explained to Dan that his parents had left early that morning for their cabin up north with friends.
Okay, that's strange, right? Wouldn't you tell your other son, Mitchell, about a trip like that?
Exactly. It's the kind of detail that sticks out a crack in the seemingly normal facade. And sure enough, when Mitchell was contacted, he had no knowledge of any such plans.
Alarm bells must have been ringing in his head at that point.
Absolutely. Mitchell, worried and confused, decided to drive up to the cabin himself. It was a 3-hour drive filled with a growing sense of dread and a desperate hope that his parents would be there. But when he arrived, the truth hit him like a punch to the gut.
What did he find?
The cabin was untouched, deserted exactly as they had left it weeks ago. No sign of his parents, no indication they'd been there recently. The story Chandler had told was falling apart, and a chilling realization began to dawn on Mitchell. Something terrible had happened.
I can't even imagine the fear and uncertainty he must have been feeling at that moment.
Driven by that fear, Mitchell immediately contacted the police and reported his parents missing. This was no longer a simple case of a family vacation gone awry. It was now an official missing persons investigation. And as investigators began to dig into Chandler's life, they stumbled upon a web of lies so intricate and audacious it would send shockwaves through the community and beyond.
This is where the trail of deception really starts to take shape, right?
Yeah.
I'm eager to hear how these lies unraveled and what they ultimately revealed.
It's a fascinating, albeit disturbing aspect of this case. Remember, Chandler had crafted this elaborate persona of success, a fabrication that spanned months, if not years. To maintain this illusion, he had to be meticulous, weaving a tapestry of falsehoods that extended far beyond casual lies.
What do you mean? What kind of lengths did he go to?
We're talking forged emails, fabricated documents, even online personas designed to bolster his fictional accomplishments. He wasn't just telling tall tales, he was constructing an alternate reality. And it was all done with a chilling level of detail and premeditation.
So he wasn't just lying to avoid a grounding. This was something much deeper, something that speaks to a potentially disturbed psyche.
You're right, it wasn't a simple case of teenage rebellion or exaggeration. The depth and complexity of his deceptions hinted at something far more unsettling.
This is where it gets really intriguing, and I'm sure our listeners are on the edge of their seats waiting to hear how this web of lies ultimately unraveled.
It did unravel, and in a way that would send chills down anyone's spine. But before we get to that, let's go back to the investigation and the crucial discovery that shifted everything. Remember, at this point, Bart and Krista are still missing, and the focus is on finding them.
Right, so the police are trying to retrace their steps, figure out where they might have gone, who they might have been with.
Exactly. And in a small town like Windsor, word travels fast. It wasn't long before a tip came and a piece of information that would change the trajectory of the investigation and cast a sinister shadow over Chandler.
This tip, it came from someone who knew Chandler.
It did. The tip came from a friend of Chandler's girlfriend who owned a farm on the outskirts of town. She had seen Chandler on her property several times, particularly near a wooded area, which struck her as odd.
I can see why that would raise suspicions,
Yes.
especially with his parents missing.
Absolutely. The police, armed with this new lead, decided to search the wooded area, and what they found would send shockwaves through the community and beyond.
This is the turning point, the moment when the case takes a truly dark turn.
You could say that. Hidden under branches and twigs, they discovered a human torso. It was later confirmed to be Bart Halderson. He had been shot twice in the back.
Oh my God, so this is no longer a missing persons case. It's a homicide investigation.
You got it. And the prime suspect, the one whose lies had already begun to crumble, was Chandler Halderson. He was arrested and charged with his father's murder.
But wait, Krista was still missing, right? What happened to her?
That's the question that haunted investigators. And the answer, as we'll discover in the next part of our depth dive, lay hidden in the digital world, a trail of deception that would ultimately lead to the unraveling of this tragic case.
Last time we left off with a chilling discovery, the body of Bart Halderson hidden away on a farm miles from the family home. While the investigation into Bart's murder was just beginning, the question of Krista's whereabouts loomed large.
Right. You are with Chandler now, the prime suspect in his father's murder. The search for Krista intensified. It was a race against time fueled by a sliver of hope that she might still be alive.
I imagine the investigators must have been working tirelessly, following every lead, every whisper of information.
Oh, they were. And remember, this was a small community, a place where people usually felt safe. The shock of Bart's murder had rattled everyone, and there was a collective desire for answers for justice.
In the midst of this chaos and uncertainty, what was Chandler's demeanor like?
That's one of the most unsettling aspects of this case. Throughout the investigation, even as the evidence against him mounted it, Chandler remained remarkably calm and composed. It was as if he was detached from the gravity of the situation, a chilling observation that would later play a significant role in the trial.
So while the police were desperately searching for Kenoda, Krista Chandler was seemingly unfazed by the unfolding events.
That's right. His lack of emotion, his cool demeanor only fueled suspicions. It was as if he was playing a part, a character in a story he was writing, rather than a real person facing the consequences of his actions.
It's almost too disturbing to comprehend. And as the investigation continued, did the police uncover any new information about Krista's disappearance?
They did, and it came from a source that's become increasingly important in modern criminal investigations, the digital world.
Yeah.
Remember all those elaborate lies Chandler had spun, the fake emails, the fabricated documents? Well, it turns out his digital footprint extended far beyond that.
You mean his online activity, his social media, things like that?
Exactly. The investigators, realizing the importance of digital evidence, obtained search warrants for Chandler's phone, computer, and social media accounts. And what they found was like opening a window into his twisted mind.
It sounds like they were piecing together a digital puzzle, a trail of breadcrumbs leading them closer to the truth.
That's a great way to put it. Each click, each message, each search term painted a picture of Chandler's movements, his intentions, and his desperate attempts to cover his tracks.
It's amazing how much information we leave behind in the digital world, often without even realizing it.
It is, and in this case, it was Chandler's digital footprint that would ultimately lead to the unraveling of his lies and the discovery of Krista's fate.
So what exactly did they find? What was this smoking gun, so to speak?
It wasn't a single piece of evidence, but rather a combination of factors. They discovered internet searches related to dismemberment, body disposal, and even inquiries about how long it takes for a body to decompose.
Oh my God. It sounds like he was planning this, meticulously researching ways to conceal his crimes.
That's what the evidence suggested. And then there was the Snapchat clue, a seemingly innocuous detail that would prove to be a turning point in the case.
Snapchat? How did that play a role?
Remember, while Chandler was being interrogated, his girlfriend was completely unaware of the gravity of the situation. She had a screenshot on her phone, a Snapchat message from Chandler sent on July 3rd, the day after Bart's disappearance.
So this message placed Chandler at a specific location.
Precisely. The message included location data that placed Chandler near the Wisconsin River about 25 miles away from his home. It seemed like a random detail at first, but investigators, desperate for any lead, decided to follow it up.
I bet they were hoping against hope that this might lead them to Krista.
They were, and it did. They searched the riverbank, meticulously combing through the undergrowth, and what they found was both heartbreaking and horrifying.
They found Krista.
They did, but not in the way anyone had hoped. They discovered Krista's dismembered remains scattered along the riverbank. It was a gruesome discovery, confirming their worst fears and revealing the depths of Chandler's depravity.
This is just horrific.
Yeah.
It's one thing to lie to deceive, but to commit such brutal acts against your own parents, it's beyond comprehension.
It is a tragedy of unimaginable proportions, and the discovery of Krista's remains shifted the focus of the investigation. Now, it wasn't just about finding a killer, it was about understanding the mind of a young man capable of such cruelty.
Right. It's no longer a question of did he do it, but why?
Exactly, and that's the question that would dominate the trial, a trial that would captivate the nation and expose the chilling truth behind the seemingly perfect facade of the Halderson family.
The discovery of Krista's remains really solidified the grim reality of this case. Both Bart and Krista Halderson were gone victims of a brutal and senseless crime, and their own son, the one who had spun a web of lies so intricate it defied belief, was the prime suspect.
Yeah, you're exactly right. The focus now shifted from searching for a missing person to understanding the motivations of the alleged killer. It was time to delve into the psychological complexities of this case to try and make sense of the unthinkable.
It's hard to even begin to imagine what could drive someone to commit such an act, especially against their own parents. What were the theories investigators were exploring?
Well, there were several. Some experts speculated about a possible narcissistic personality disorder, pointing to Chandler's grandiose lies and his seemingly unwavering belief in his own fabricated persona. Others suggested sociopathic tendencies, citing his lack of empathy and remorse.
It's fascinating and deeply unsettling to consider these possibilities. Was there any evidence of prior mental health issues or behavioral problems in Chandler's past?
That's a key question, and one that investigators meticulously explored. While there were no official diagnoses or documented history of mental illness, those who knew Chandler well often described him as quiet, withdrawn, and somewhat of a loner.
So a young man who kept to himself, perhaps struggling with internal conflicts or insecurities that he masked with these elaborate lies.
It's certainly a plausible scenario. Remember, we're dealing with a young man who created an entirely fictional life, a life filled with accomplishments he never achieved and experiences he never had.
It's almost like he was living in a fantasy world, a world where he was the hero of his own story.
That's a powerful analogy, and one that might hold some truth. Perhaps somewhere along the lines between reality and fantasy blurred, and the consequences of maintaining this facade became too overwhelming.
So as the trial approached, what was the prosecution's main argument? What was their theory about the motive behind these horrific crimes?
The prosecution believed that Chandler's web of lies was closing in on him. His father, Bart, had begun to suspect something was amiss, questioning Chandler about inconsistencies in his stories. They theorized that Chandler, fearing exposure and the potential consequences, snapped killing his father in a moment of panic.
And Krista.
The prosecution argued that Krista, once she realized what had happened to Bart, became a liability. Chandler couldn't risk her going to the police, so he silenced her as well in a desperate attempt to protect his fabricated world.
It's chilling to think about the level of premeditation involved. He not only took 2 lives, but then went to extraordinary lengths to cover up his crimes. The dismemberment, the disposal of the bodies, it speaks to a level of depravity that's hard to fathom.
You're right. The prosecution painted a picture of a cold, calculating individual, someone who could meticulously plan and execute these heinous acts without a flicker of remorse.
What about the defense? How did they counter these arguments?
The defense faced an uphill battle. The evidence against Chandler was substantial, including the physical evidence at the crime scenes, witness testimonies, and of course the damning digital trail. Their strategy focused on challenging the prosecution's narrative, suggesting alternative explanations for the evidence, and highlighting the lack of a clear motive.
Did they try to argue that someone else might have been responsible for the murders?
They did attempt to introduce that possibility, but they lacked the evidence to support such a claim. They questioned the reliability of some witness accounts and pointed to the fact that there were no eyewitnesses to the actual killings.
But with all the circumstantial evidence, the lies, the digital footprint, it seems like a difficult defense to mount.
It was, and ultimately the jury didn't buy it. After deliberating for only a few hours, they returned with a verdict: guilty on all counts. Chandler Halderson was convicted of 2 counts of first-degree intentional homicide, mutilating a corpse, hiding a corpse, and providing false information to law enforcement.
A guilty verdict on all counts. It sounds like the jury was convinced beyond a reasonable doubt. What was Chandler's reaction to the verdict? Did he show any remorse for his actions?
That's what's particularly haunting about this case. Even when facing the weight of the evidence and the pronouncements of guilt, Chandler remained impassive, emotionless. There were no tears, no apologies, no visible signs of regret or remorse. His composure was unsettling, to say the least.
It's as if he was watching someone else's story unfold, completely detached from the consequences of his own actions.
Exactly, and this detachment, this lack of empathy, was a recurring theme throughout the trial. It made it difficult to reconcile the seemingly ordinary young man sitting in the courtroom with the horrific acts he'd committed.
So justice was served, in a sense. But can there ever truly be justice in a case like this, where the pain is so profound and the loss so immeasurable?
That's a question that lingers long after the gavel falls and the courtroom empties. The legal system can punish the perpetrator, but it can't bring back the victims or heal the wounds left behind. The Halderson case is a stark reminder of the fragility of life, the darkness that can lurk beneath the surface, and the enduring power of human cruelty.
It's a case that leaves us with more questions than answers. A chilling reminder that even in the most seemingly idyllic settings, evil can flourish. And while we may never fully comprehend the depths of Chandler Halderson's mind or the motivations behind his horrific actions, his story serves as a cautionary tale. A reminder to be vigilant, to cherish our loved ones, and to never take our safety and well-being for granted.
Well said. And it reminds us that sometimes the greatest threats can come from those closest to us. A sobering thought that forces us to confront the complexities of human nature and the fragility of trust.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the Halderson case. We hope it sparks some important conversations and reflections. Remember to follow and subscribe to Crime Podcastle and our YouTube channel for more explorations into the darkest corners of the human experience. Until next time, stay safe.